they changed again to Mountbatten, Brusleon, which is the name of the Queen Mother, and Guelph. The word Guelph is the key word there because that's the Venetian connection, the Black Guelphs. Open any encyclopedia and start reading up on the black nobility and the Guelphs, and a fascinating story will unfold. Valdemar Valerian refers to them as the Serpentine world order, understanding that these people are from the Serpent dynasties. All subsequent coups d'etats and revolutions and wars of the 19th and 20th centuries are centered in the battle of the Guelphs to hold and enhance their power, now the New World Order. In Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, my book, I point out the fact that, look at the grammar, look at the statement. If you have a New World Order, does not that imply in a way that we have an old world disorder? Well, as I've pointed out in this program, there certainly was more than enough disorder in the old world. And for those who think that the American politicians and leaders are in fact Republican and American and disconnected from royal ties, we find from David Icke that the Queen of England made Bush's military chiefs, Colin Powell and Norman Schwarzkopf, honorary knights of the British Empire. Honorary knights of the British Empire. This is not just some minor award you just happen to get of a weekend. These pats on the back show you who these individuals are actually working for. The British system controls the American system and always has. This is a republic on paper. That's it. The Constitution has long been null and void. The country's been bankrupt and in debt for goodness knows how long. And every leader, including Roosevelt, all the way back to the Founding Fathers, has been an agent of the Black Venetians, of the Knights Templar, the Knights of Columbus, the Freemasonic organizations, the Illuminati, and the British system that controls them. Professor Anthony Sutton, who wrote this fine book on the subject, American professor, was actually approached by the Skull and Bones as they attempted to recruit him. And not knowing who on earth this group was, he researched it, he opened their packages, he looked into the whole question, and in horror of who these people were, after years of research, he wrote many books on the subject, including this, America's Secret Establishment, Introduction to the Order of the Skull and Bones. And Sutton has grasped the essence of what we're saying here. He says in his book, their interests are global, and much as they may protest, we see no difference between trilateral globalism and, for example, British and French imperialism of the 19th century, or the Holy Roman Empire, for that matter. How right he is. Webster Tarpley, in the book The Venetian Takeover of England, writes, the oligarchical system of Great Britain is not autochthonous, product of English or British history. It represents rather the tradition, which has been transplanted into the British Isles through a series of upheavals into England and Scotland from the Venetian oligarchy, along with its philosophy, political forms, family fortunes, and imperial geopolitics. Jeffrey Steinberg, in The Last Empire in the History of the World, writes, these families constitute a financier oligarchy. They are the power behind the Windsor throne. They view themselves as the heirs to the Venetian oligarchy, which infiltrated and subverted England from the period of 1509 to 1715, and established a new, more virulent Anglo-Dutch-Swiss strain of the oligarchical system of Imperial Babylon, Persia, Rome, and Byzantine. So there you have it. There is a direct paragraph that shows you the connection. Incidentally, Switzerland, as we mentioned earlier, is where the headquarters of World Freemasonry is. And over the door in Zurich, Switzerland, you can go there yourself. And that's where the courts are. That's where the so-called charities of the world, like the Red Cross, are located, and many others. It's also where the world banks are kept. Those secretive world banks. Well, of course they're secretive. The oligarchs don't want you tracking the checks, following the money. But you also have the headquarters of World Freemasonry. And over the door, plain as day for everyone to see, it says in Latin, Ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. Implemented by the likes of Albert Pike and many of the politicians of the world. You create wall-to-wall evil, wall-to-wall debauchery, wall-to-wall license, and wall-to-wall chaos. You fund the gangs, you fund the terrorists of the world, You create so much upheaval that the masses, who are your real enemy, your real rivals, just come to you in a big line saying, help us, what can we do? Let's strengthen, the powers of government. If it worked for Adolf Hitler and Genghis Khan, it works for anybody. The statesman and leading economist, Lyndon LaRouche, who himself has spent time in the federal stockade, has this to say: the Venetian method is the method of not taking sides, but playing sides against one another to one's advantage. You go into a country, you go among a people, you go to an individual person and you corrupt them by knowing the principle of corruption, which is embedded in every person. That principle of corruption is the person's self-ego, as an autonomous ego, as a microcosm in counterposition, in struggle against the macrocosm. What LaRouche is pointing out here is more metaphysical. He's saying that the individual falls under hypnosis, he falls under control, because he himself is divided. This is a more sinister, the more subtle, the more pernicious form of control. It's not just political, it's not just social, it's not just domestic. There's a psychological component to this. I'll go into this in other programs in the series. But this idea of being in conflict within is the perfect bedrock, the perfect state of affairs that needs to exist before you accept or you become blinded to the conflict around you. You're more susceptible to that kind of control if your body politic, your own republic, is in complete chaos. James Morris, in his book Pax Britannica, says, before she set out on her Diamond Jubilee procession, on the morning of 22nd of June, 1897, Queen Victoria of England went to the telegraph room at Buckingham Palace. It was a few minutes after 11 o'clock. She pressed an electric button. An impulse was transmitted to the Central Telegraph Office in St. Martin-le-Grand. In a matter of seconds, her Jubilee message was on its way to every corner of her empire. It was the largest empire in the history of the world, comprising nearly a quarter of the land mass of the earth and a quarter of its population. Victoria herself was Queen Empress of such aged majesty that some of her simpler subjects considered her divine and slaughtered propitiatory goats before her image. So what Morris is bringing out here is the size and magnitude of this empire. And of course, we might ask a very simple question: what do you need empire for? Why would such a small, minuscule, insignificant country like England, of all places, granted with its Venetian Dutch oligarchy in control, why would it suddenly rise to send its tentacles out to the world? What is the reason? The reason has never been really handed to us. It's always put down to power and money, and that just covers it. But now we know of the old Atlantean tie, the old John Dee pact, and the idea that all peoples, all nations, all tribes had to be subjugated. The diamond mines, the ores that were needed to artificially move technology forward, move mankind forward to the point where the technology of the Nephilim could be rebuilt. We still live in those times. It's happening right before our eyes. Now, you have to take what popes say with a pinch of salt, but what Pope Pius VI said in his book, Memoirs of a Renaissance Pope, bears reading about the Venetians. He makes an interesting comment. He says, but what do fish care about law? As among brute beasts, aquatic creatures have the least intelligence. So, among human beings, the Venetians are the least just and least capable of humanity. And naturally, for they live on sea and pass their lives in the water. They use ships instead of horses. They are not so much companions of men as of fish and comrades of marine monsters. They wish to appear Christians before the world, but in reality they never think of God. And, except for the state, which they do regard as a deity, they hold nothing sacred. Jeffrey Steinberg also says, among their own ranks, these financier oligarchs refer to themselves as the Club of the Isles, after the original Prince of the Isles, Edward Albert, that's King Edward VII, the son of Queen Victoria, who orchestrated the Crimean War, the Opium Wars, the Russo-Japanese War, and World War I, to consolidate Britain as the primus inter pares, that's the first among equals, of the European monarchs and feudal families. The Club of the Isles, under the direction of the British monarchy, draws its resources and personalities from the Netherlands, Switzerland, France, Germany, and Italy, and orchestrates the actions of the caste of terminally Anglophilic Americans, typified by Henry Kissinger and former President George Bush.